On what date did the ethics screen for the Prime Minister come into force?
Mr. Barrett, there really are two stages in this process. The screen that is in place now, the result of pretty exhaustive work on the part of the Ethics Commissioner with respect to the disclosure provided by the Prime Minister, that screen was put in place, I believe, on July the 10th. Prior to that, on an interim basis, a somewhat simplified screen was in place from very shortly after the Prime Minister became Prime Minister and until the more fully elaborated screen came into place on July 10.
Are you able to articulate, perhaps in writing to the committee, unless you're able to do it now, the differences between the initial screen that followed, in your words, very shortly after the Prime Minister assumed the role?
Yeah, the principal change between the two, and it's, I think, pretty logical. After the disclosure of the Prime Minister to the Ethics Commissioner, that provided the Ethics Commissioner with a full overview of the assets of the Prime Minister. That enabled the Ethics Commissioner to develop a list of 103 companies, and that list is published on the site of the Ethics Commissioner. So the principal difference between the two, there were some minor differences, but the principal difference between the two is the screen that's in place now contains the 103 companies that are the result of the Prime Minister's disclosure. Prior to that, it was primarily focused around Brookfield and Brookfield companies because the Prime Minister, while having made disclosure, the Ethics Commissioner hadn't completed their work on it. So that's the principal difference between the first and second.
How will Prime Minister Carney's planned cuts to the public service affect the units responsible for the conflict of interest screening as it's implemented?
Those reductions will not affect this.
So there's documents that show that machinery of government secretariat vetted the guest list for the Prime Minister's London and New York meetings. Would the vetting process be compromised or the structure of it changed in any way by these cuts?
No, Mr. Barrett, let's back up a bit. The government has priorities, as you know. One of those priorities is the prudent and rigorous application of this screen. So as we go about the task of continuing to right-size the public service for the future, clearly one of our jobs, one of our responsibilities is to ensure that those priorities of the government are always able to be implemented. This being one of those priorities, we will ensure that the workforce, that the people who are responsible for the operation of the screen, et cetera, that they continue to be able to discharge their responsibilities fully.
So, in a word, any reductions
As
to
you'll find, it's hard for me to give you a word.
Any reductions to machinery of government or the team that is currently being used to implement the screen, that team will not be affected by any cuts?
Well, the answer to it is we will continue to administer the screen fully, prudently. There will be no compromise or impact on the ability of the public service to operate the screen now,
but
during,
the size
or
of the
after
team,
the reductions.
if I may, sir, the size of the team may change?
But this is my point. It doesn't, to be direct, it doesn't really work that way. So can I explain?
Well, I have very limited time. I've got a little less than a minute left.
Well, I'll give you the 30-second answer then.
I'll give you 15 if I could, sir.
Okay, well, the way this works is it's embedded across the public service. It's embedded in the principal departments where there is responsibility for the sectors in which the screen is most likely to be applied. So that involves a highly decentralized system, which, yes, at the end of the day is overseen by the Privy Council Office and at the end of the day by myself. But it's a mistake to think that there's just a small dedicated group of people working on this. This is something like other priorities of the government that reach into departments.
You sold your Brookfield, your controlled assets, shares in Brookfield, to avoid conflicts. Shouldn't the Prime Minister, shouldn't a Prime Minister do the same to prevent influencing decisions that that will have the direct benefit to their financial interests?
Well, I think you partially correctly and partially incorrectly characterize my thinking around my decision to dispose of my my investment in Brookfield. First off, as a matter of record, my assets have been in blind trust pretty much since 2009, when I started working at La Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, for good and reasonable
Mr.
reasons.
Sabia, we may have to get back to this. I have to give other equal
come
time. I have to give equal time to each member of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Sabia. On November 3rd, you made your declaration of conflict of interest. You sold your assets for Brookfield. Why? When I learned that I was investing in Brookfield, that was in the process that I was going through with the ethics commissioner in his office, because all of my assets had been in a blind trust and had been there for years. It was on September 24th, the commissioner's office told me, and with other investments that were shared, I saw that I had investments in Brookfield. And so my response was clear. I quickly decided to sell those shares, because as an administrator, it was simpler, it was more practical to not invest in Brookfield, given the Prime Minister's position and given that my role is to protect the Prime Minister and his institution against the perception of a conflict of interest. I decided to sell because it was simpler. That's great, Mr. Sabia. And so you were aware that there could be a potential conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. It wasn't a conflict of interest, and it was simpler to avoid that appearance. When did you sell your assets? I made that decision. I'm not sure exactly. I think it was 30 minutes after seeing that Brookfield was on the list. With C5, which was adopted very quickly, it has to do with economic development strategies, and Brookfield would be impacted, for example, because it has railway lines and natural gas treatment facilities, oil sands, and is present in ports. These are all areas that will be impacted by C5. And Brookfield has assets in all those areas. Is that why you sold your assets because it would have been simpler to manage the situation? No. I decided to sell because I wanted to better play my role as an administrator for the institution and for the Prime Minister. It was not linked to C5 or anything like that. But you can agree that there's the problem of the appearance of a conflict of interest. Because of the role played by the Prime Minister and Brookfield's assets, and with the government's economic plans. If not, you wouldn't have sold. One moment, I just want to finish my question, please. If the Ethics Commissioner raised that or flagged it and requested a screen, that means that there was a potential appearance of a conflict of interest. I'll say it again. I decided to sell because there is a screen that protects the Prime Minister. And at the Commissioner's request, I did not have to submit a screen. I knew that the Prime Minister had investments in some of Brookfield's activities, and so to better manage the screen, I chose to sell my shares. So it's not a matter of a conflict of interest. It was just to simplify things. Simplifying things, what does that mean? Simplifying things because you wanted to be able to apply the screen that was required? What are you simplifying then? It was clear, given the role that the Prime Minister played in Brookfield, and it was clear that Brookfield would be an important part of my activities as an administrator. And so to simplify those activities, because it was clear that Brookfield would be at the heart of many of my decisions. And so, in order to simplify those decisions, I decided that it would be simpler to sell. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Thank you, Mr. Thériault.